Sio Nigada. Thank you all for being here again, and I'll go ahead and introduce our lunch. And as we said, we'll go through the buffet, and then I'll come up and I'm going to show you how to make the soup that we're having today with some helpers from the community here. So what we're having is a corn masa dumpling soup with some indigenous varieties of beans. So the base is a bean soup made with what we call, in the Pawnee community, they're called bear paw beans. They're also known as scarlet runner beans. I like the name bear paw beans because they really do look like these little bear paws. And so they're this really big, fat runner bean. And then there's also some painted like a horse beans. And so the beans themselves make this broth. There's nothing else in that broth. It's just all the flavor from those beans. And then we also add some wild seasonings like what we seasoned the trout with last night. It's got juniper, smoked salt, a little bit of cedar salt. What else is in there? A little bit of maple sugar and some cumin. And then there's a little bit of arugula greens that we wilt in there. And then we make these dumplings that in Spanish are called chochayotes. And we also call them belly button dumplings because they kind of look like a little belly button. Or I like to think of them as these little mini bowls within your bowl. So they're like little masa bowls that are holding your broth for you. And then we also have an encore presentation of the tomato soup from last night, if anybody wants some more of that. And then the salad is some fresh baby greens tossed in a wild herb and sumac vinaigrette. There's lamb's quarters and dandelion and some lemon and red wine vinegar and olive oil in that vinaigrette. And then for dessert, we have some blue corn masa cookies. And this is the blue corn masa also from the Pawnee Nation Seed Preservation Project. So the same masa that, or the same corn that we used in the grits last night, but this has been processed, nixtamalization processed to remove the hull and then ground into a really fine flour so it's able to make a really nice baked good out of it. So I hope you all enjoy that. And then I'll see y'all after you get your plates and we'll learn to make that soup. For seconds, so.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Mahler. I'm the event project manager for Indigenous Peoples Summit. And
I'll get you a bowl.
Thanks. Thanks. I'm speaking to you today to tell you that dinner is happening at 6, so stick around for dinner. And there's no formal program to that, but that's going to be prepared by Chef Warrior. So we'd love to see you all tonight for that. And that's taking place right here, this room, 6 o'clock, Afterglow dinner, Chef Warrior. But right now, I want to introduce to you someone from Cherokee Nation who cooked this beautiful meal for us today and is going to show us how to make chochayotes and is going to work with a young lady from the Maya community. Let's give it up one more time for Chef Nico Albert Williams.
Oh my goodness. That's quite the intro. I feel like I should be like dribbling a basketball when I run up here. I'm not. That would be a whole different kind of show. Okay, so Widow, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here and share this meal with you all and show you how to make these dumplings. And it's a very simple recipe. And before we get started on that, I'll just say a few words about the work that we do with Burning Cedar Sovereign Kitchen. This is a great example of the type of thing that we do, which is we try to provide resources for our urban community in Tulsa to use traditional ingredients that are sourced from indigenous producers. Those are important things to us to make sure that the foods that we're using are produced in a way that is in good relationship with the land and in good relationship with our communities, and to establish relationship like we've been talking about especially on the last panel, talking about relationship between ourselves and the natural world and the food and the medicine that's provided by it. And so we provide this access to these traditional foods, and then we teach people how to use it. There's so many different ways that we can combine, both traditional ancestral recipes and techniques, and then also incorporate, all the techniques that have come to us from other places, and be able to have modern, recipes that use traditional ancestral ingredients, and as well as using these old recipes. So the recipe that I use today is actually very old. So this is something that would have been cooked in ancient times, and I believe that it's still just as delicious today. And I think it's really exciting to eat these very old foods and taste how interesting and creative they can be. And so the base of the soup, I'll start with that, is we saw the bear paw beans and the painted like a horse beans. We just cook those in a good amount of fresh water, no seasoning or anything like that. Just cook the beans until they're very soft. And that's everything that's in that broth, and it's so flavorful. All I really added was a little bit of salt, a little bit of cumin, and some pepper, and everything else comes from those beans. And I feel like when we use foods that are not produced in a good way, we have to add so much to them. You have to add all of these seasonings, and that's where we get all of the processed foods, because they take so much sugar and salt and spices to make it taste good, to make it make it appealing to us. When we use these ingredients that were grown in our own gardens, that were grown by our own people, we don't have to add all of that. The food itself is bringing the flavor. So that's what is in this broth. And I'm just going to keep this pot at barely a simmer. And then I'm going to ask if I have some assistants that can come up and help me make some dumplings. I'm going to show you guys how to make these dumplings. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make this dough. And again, it's the simplest thing. And in our tradition, in Cherokee tradition, this would be a very similar dough to what we call, it's our bread. We call it bean bread. But what we would do is take flour like this. This is a blue corn masa flour, basically. So if you think of masa harina that you get in the bags. Hello, everyone. We'll introduce you in just a second. So there's basically two different kinds of cornmeal that we can use. There's cornmeal, and then there's masa harina. A lot of people wonder what's the difference between those. Why can I make tamales out of masa harina and then it never turns out right when I use cornmeal? The difference is nixtamalization. So we process the dried corn with ash, or nowadays modern folks will use, it's usually called cal or lime, culinary lime, to process and remove the outer hull. And then we dry it and grind it. And so basically masa harina is a cornmeal that doesn't have the hull in it. And without the hull, it's able to hold on to itself and create a dough. So that's why if you try to use cornmeal or something, it's kind of got all these little barriers in it, basically, because you grind it up with the hull. Yes? Yes, exactly. It's the process that you use to make hominy. So we get it to the stage where we're cleaning off, rinsing off and pulling off that hull. You can take that and continue on and put it whole in soups, or dry it. You can grind it like that and make a dough, or you can dry it again and then grind it, and then that's what you have here. So this is Pawnee blue corn that has been processed to remove the hull, and then dried, and then ground very, very fine. And so this is what we use to make the cookies, and it'll also be serving as our dough. And so while I mix this, I'm just adding a little bit of very hot water and mixing, and we want basically the consistency of like Play-Doh. And actually, I committed my own cardinal sin, and I added more water than I need to, but would you grab that Pawnee corn? It's in a Ziploc bag back there. That's why I have my right-hand man over there. Thank you. So I'm going to add a little bit more to that. See how it's kind of loose? We want the consistency of Play-Doh, where it's kind of dry, but it holds together, and every grain is wet. So we'll add a little bit more there. And while we wait on that, I would like these ladies to introduce themselves, because these are going to be my helpers, and I'll show you how to make these dumplings. So Just your name and where you're from. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Luz Marina. I am from Guatemala.
Hello, my name is Marilena and I was born here, but my parents are from Guatemala.
Koyasha Shia Cheyenne. I am a Texas native, and I am from Texas. I just said it. Thank you.
Widow, thank you. So, back in Tulsa at Burning Cedar Sovereign Kitchen, one of the things that we really like to focus on is educating our youth and getting everybody from the younger generation excited about traditional foods and food sovereignty, because, our generations, my generation and even my parents' generation, it's difficult to make these changes. And we acknowledge that, we're set in our ways, and there's a lot of, lifestyle changes that go with healing through accessing traditional foods. And the best way for us to ensure that we have these foods in the future is to have our children learn to cook these foods, to introduce these foods as early as we can to our children so that they grow up craving these foods. And that's something that we're, trying to get into our communities, is to be able to have a taste for this as early as possible. And this is our comfort food, it's not a bag of cookies, it's making dumplings together, because the type of medicine that you get from foods like this is, it hits a lot of different notes. And so we talk a lot about nutrition and about, how these foods are packed with micronutrients and packed with antioxidants and all of these great things that are missing and are watered down in the modern foods that we get from commercial and, the modern food system that we have. But there's more healing to this than just that nutritional content. We also get spiritual, emotional, and mental healing from this. So the spiritual and emotional and mental connection is connecting with foods that were grown by our own community, connecting with foods that were grown in our own lands, and connecting in a way that connects us to our ancestors going back, and then connects us to future generations as you learn to make these foods. So if everybody wants to glove up, we're gonna start making these. Come over here. I'll get this out of the way. Here we go. And usually we'll kind of set this dough to marinate for a while, but it'll work just like this. So because it's the consistency of Play-Doh, it's easy to mold. And you guys are a little older, but I've done this workshop with kids from even, preschool and kindergarten. And it's one of the best recipes you can teach to kids, because it is. You just give them a bowl of Play-Doh and wash their hands and get them a little ball like this. And so you kind of roll it into a ball like that. And then you take your thumb and you press it in the middle. And then you can kind of shape it into these little mini bowls, just like that. So you guys can go ahead and grab some, and we'll kind of form these and put them on our plate, and we'll let them sit and cure a little bit. And then when we get our soup ready to cook these, the main thing to remember is not to have your soup boiling too hard, because we don't want to break the dumplings apart. So you have it at just barely a simmer, and then we kind of lay them on the top and they steam in the soup. So as you make these, just come over and set them in there, and they'll cook right in that broth. And I love this recipe for dumplings because it can go in this bean soup, which I really love it in bean soup, because it's like making little pottery bowls, and then each bowl has its bowl within a bowl, and it holds its little beans in the dumpling itself. But it's great to put in vegetable soups. It's a great kind of substitute as a gluten-free dumpling that doesn't contain any kind of wheat flour or any preservatives or even salt or anything like that. It's just the corn and water. And for me, one of my most cherished, most comforting foods is chicken and dumplings. That's what my dad always used to make us. Chicken and dumplings just hits me really hard in my heart and makes me feel good when when I need a pick-me-up. That's what I make. And
I've always felt bad. Oh, those are perfect. That's beautiful. Okay, go ahead and just really carefully set it on the top, and it'll kind of sink in there. Awesome. Thank you. You can make a couple more. We'll do all the dough. I think there's just room in here. So I've always wanted a way to make chicken and dumplings that was maybe a little healthier, because the chicken soup part is great, and then we would dump these dumplings that are like this big, and it's like eating, 4 loaves of bread in your bowl of soup. This is the compromise with that. Is it's delicious. It's got that feeling of that chewy, good dumpling in your soup, southern cooking, but it's made with ancestral ingredients. So I will open it up while we make these little dumplings and drop them in. And if anybody has any questions about this recipe or about the work of Burning Cedar Sovereign Wellness or food sovereignty in general, I'm here for that. Exactly. This recipe, it echoes, right? This recipe is something that I love about, what I love about it is it does tie a lot of communities together, because we've got that southern hot water cornbread. We would also use this method to like make corn pone, where we would make that hot water cornbread and fry it in a skillet. And oh, those are perfect. Just set it right on the top. No, I love it. I'm going to interrupt my own self and say I love seeing the shape of their dumplings, because that's part of the fun. Is if you do this with your family, you can make them in these different shapes, and you get a ladle full of the soup, and in your bowl you can be like, oh, I got his dumpling, or you can kind of identify them. They keep their shape. I did this recipe with a group of kids for our summer camp for the Tulsa Indian Education Program. We made this with age ranges from kindergarten all the way to 5th grade, and they all loved making the dumplings. And kids were like making little cats, and they were making like little drinking glasses. I mean, they treated it like it was really clay, that they were doing their little art project, and then they dunked it in the soup, and they were all so excited to dig around in the soup and find their dumpling, So like, what better way to get somebody excited about cooking and about healthy food? I mean, I've never seen a bunch of kids eat, it was like I put a bag of Takis in front of them or something, but it was ancestral vegetable soup, it was very, very rewarding. But anyway, this recipe really, really ties together cultures, because we use this technique that our ancestors developed of niche tamalization, of removing that hull from that corn, creating that masa dough. I call it masa because that's just the tradition that I'm from, is I know it as masa, but it's the same as making hominy for Cherokee bean bread. We grind that dough. Instead of using hot water, we use the broth from a pot of beans, and we add the beans into it, and we work that dough with actual beans and bean broth in it, and then we wrap that in corn leaves or sometimes hickory leaves or corn husks, and then we steam that, or in Cherokee, we boil it. That's exactly like making tamales, And how far away is Cherokee, North Carolina, from Mexico and the indigenous communities there? But these techniques tie us together. We have these same foods. And in the same way that hot water cornbread is that same making the dough and frying it in that way. And there's so many different cultures across Turtle Island. Anybody that has a relationship with corn has recipes like this. So this is something that unites us, and a way that we can use our ancestral ingredients to build community. So my other tip here is I'm using a wooden spoon, because I like to be very gentle with the dumplings. When you set them in here, they're vulnerable for a minute. You put them in their little stew, and they need to kind of set with themselves. And when you stir it, you just want to very carefully kind of fluff the beans underneath them so that they kind of move apart without breaking apart. And then a little bit of that masa will come off, and it'll thicken and add flavor to that broth. Perfect. With her question was, can you do anything with like the hull that you pull off of the corn kernel after you make the hominy? I've never had any teaching of like anything to use the hull itself for. We usually rinse it off, and then I will say, when we make the hominy in the traditional way, we use a hardwood ash, and we create like this really thick slurry of ash and water and add corn to it. It's usually 1 part corn to 1 part ash and then 2 parts water. So it's pretty thick and sludgy. And then that creates the reaction that softens the outer hull of that corn. And then we'll take that water that, that process adds a lot of calcium because the ash has calcium in it. And we take that kind of ash water solution that has, I believe it's a higher pH, and you can add that to your garden, and that improves the soil in your garden. So you could probably add the hulls in there too, because you're rinsing all of that off along with the ash. Add that to your garden, and it adds to the soil. Yeah, no problem. All right, I think we've got one last one, and we'll let these simmer. And I know we've got lots of programming to catch up on, so that's it for me, unless we have some more questions, or I'm happy to answer or engage. Thank you so much for helping with that. And then I know there's a couple people that didn't get dumplings, so as soon as these are done, we'll hand them out. Thank you.
Made with love.
Yes, made with love. Thank you.